This is James Walker, and welcome to Real Talk, Real People. This is the podcast that turns the mic over to everyday people to hear what they have to say about the issues and problems we face as a society. Hello, folks. Thank you very much for joining us again this week. The conversation is about being black in Connecticut, and my guest today is Bridgeport resident Shariah Smith. Shariah wants to talk about identity. She says one of the major problems in black urban areas is that black people as a group really haven't identified who they are. And she has a very, very logical argument. Let's listen to what she has to say.
I think it's a really good idea to talk about this and start having this type of communication in our communities, smaller and larger. And one of the most important things that I think we need to do right now is to get clear with identity as it relates to being Black and have people really start to look at what that means because over the years and generations, we've been through things like Negro and African American and now Black. So I think that identity is going to help people clear up and start to move forward. And what people should do is get in touch with that identity as it relates to our lineage, as opposed to just celebrating, as you mentioned, things like identity politics and whatever it is that people are seeing in what they believe the Biden Harris administration is going to do. Because I think that mistakes were made even in regards to President Obama in the past and identity politics and people not really having political expectations and not making political actions because so many people aren't clear with our identity as Black people in America. So that's where I think we need to start.
And how do you categorize our identity as blacks in America?
It really relates to a few things, but one of the main things I believe is lineage. I know that there are some people who really don't like the idea of Black being related to poverty and Black being related to struggle and Black being related to slavery in particular. But we really have to learn whether it's just getting the knowledge from books, however people get their information, or maybe they need to broaden that out to really understand that even though it can be looked at as a negative thing for Black people to be identified with some of those um, issues and negative things, that there can also be opportunities brought out of that because of those things are not our fault. And I think that too many people, have this bootstrap mentality or this idea that Black people are inherently bad or that we just can't pull ourselves out when there are things in place and things that have happened intentionally to put us and keep us kind of in that negative light, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it
So
makes
I think that people should, I think once that people start to learn again that identity as it applies to lineage and where we came from, they can start to say, okay, Black people have been trying over the years and we have gone through this, that, and the other thing, but these are the things that have happened or have not happened as a result of that.
But I think one of the big problems, at least to me, one of the big problems is that blacks fall into that ongoing message that, of slavery and all of the things that keep us from moving forward. It seems that we buy into it and we seem to stay there. And that is kind of a problem to me because I don't want us to believe that we are lazy and that we don't have the means in which to pick ourselves up. I find one of the biggest problems to me right now in the African American community is unity. We seem to be splintered. We seem to have some people who go strong at one issue and others who go strong at other issues, but we don't come together in one united force. For example, my feeling is And this is where I tend to go when I talk about Black America and how we can move forward, particularly here in Connecticut.
Hmm.
And it is one of those things that does indeed, it's a long term thing, but I just imagine what it would be like if Black people were united and, for example, took all of their money that is spread out over all these banks in Connecticut and concentrated it into one bank that we can then have some say into where these dollars go. And that is my big thing with the Black community. I just want more unity, and I'm wondering how you feel if we had more unity, would your life be better?
Absolutely. But I think there's a couple ways to look at that. I see what you're saying, and I know that particular part of the conversation is brought up a lot. Um, One thing particular for Connecticut, I could be wrong. I was born in 1983. From what I see, what happens specifically here in Connecticut is that with Black people, for the most part, were kept into whichever projects, at least from in Norwalk, where I grew up in Bridgeport, and other places. So I start to think about what our Black communities looked like, what they look like now, and what happened. So there was a lot
What
of people
happened?
going to jail, drugs ravaged the communities, people put in prison from our communities at whatever high rates of numbers, communities that were left behind, even kind of like now. I live in Bridgeport, still do. And it seems like there was white flight that really affected Connecticut. And then on top of that, it seemed like Connecticut pushed a lot of Black people back down south or in other places of America because of the uh, affordability or lack of affordability here. Um, and I still feel like even now in Connecticut in particular, most of the Black Americans have left. Like now we do have a lot of maybe mixed race folks, maybe people from different islands like Jamaicans, Haitians. They don't necessarily have the same story as we do, and they still qualify as Black, if you know what I'm saying, or even if you talk about Africans. So when I talk about identity, I mean really getting close with that, because you do have a point about community, but again, you have to talk about what community. You're talking about Native Black Americans who come from communities that have been economically blown up, for lack of a better words. So, how strong do you think that community is going to be on uniting? Like, we have some Black people from our communities who get a good job or have a chance to get a good education and maybe move a little further away from the hood. But then what does that mean for us again uniting? Because those people believe, hey, I made it, my family's okay. Well, what about you? And the majority of Black people just don't have the resources. They probably don't have the education to be able to stand up, know what they're asking for, especially when it comes to politics, and unite for something better. So I
You
believe
know,
we can be divided, but we really do need the resources. I don't want us to get stuck on anything either, but I see how it happens.
yeah, and I think that really goes to my point. And you mentioned that blacks come from different walks of life. We're Jamaican, et cetera, et cetera. But whites don't do it that way. I mean, whites don't separate themselves into German Americans, Italian Americans, et cetera, when they go to the polls or when they look at things on how it affects their people. They are one people. And that's where I think the major problem is. Though I am beginning to understand what you mean by we have to look at our lineage. And but I don't see how that would translate into better opportunities here for blacks.
Identifying with our lineage and where we come from isn't going to guarantee that, but what I'm hoping that it does is get people on the right path, because when it comes to, like you said, people who identify as white, They deal with their own things, over the generations. You've had Irish people who've been excluded, and then later on through whatever policies included, and for some other communities as well. Now, here's one thing with them: as different people's numbers start to rise, because as far as the population goes, and things like immigration. Of course, there have been changes, and now with coronavirus, there's even more changes. I'm not sure how those groups' numbers are going to be able to affect politics. But here's the thing: when you come to America from wherever looking for the American dream, you think about who's laid the foundation to make that possible for you to reach that, and if those people themselves are being left out of that. And that's kind of what's happening. So yeah, the people will come from Ireland, from Germany, from Russia, various white identifying nations, and they'll come over here. They may All of them may not live together with the native white Americans, or whatever you want to call them, or the people who identify as white American. They may live a little bit different from black people too. When it comes to them going to the polls, they're going to continue to do things that benefit their communities. They're not looking like, hey, we came from here and we're able to do this. But these black folks who've been here, who've laid the foundation for many folks to be able to immigrate here and have something, don't.
You're listening to Real Talk, Real People, the podcast that turns the mic over to everyday people. We're back talking with Shariah Smith, a Bridgeport resident who says that in order for blacks to be successful, they must first identify who they are.
You would think that maybe the black identifying immigrant population would do that and would somehow unite with us and talk about things like dream hoarding, or again getting those jobs and opportunities that many native black Americans have been cut out of, but they don't.
No, they don't. And the question is, why? Do they not see themselves as black, do you think? Or exactly?
Again, they benefit from, in cases of maybe some Jamaican Americans, nursing jobs or other things that, like my parents or our parents or whoever might not have had the opportunity for that free training to get that. So they have been able to get certain opportunities. Again, their numbers as far as immigration may not match. I'm not sure when they are going to maybe open their eyes and say, hey, yeah, we've been over here, being able to come over here and get a little bit of this and a little bit of that. But looking forward, what does that really mean? How many of our people are they really immigrating? What's going on in my own country? I don't know that kind of thing. So, right now, what folks like myself and other American descendants of slavery are focusing on is our lineage and trying to get our people together, because what can we do about those folks?
So, what do you think needs to happen here in Connecticut? What would you like to see if you were a leader and you were getting ready to stand in front of an audience of blacks and tell them what should be done to move forward other than lineage? What would you
Mhm.
tell them?
If I was a leader here, to be honest with you, my conversation probably wouldn't start with the black community. First of all, there's not a whole lot of us here left. I would start with the other members of the community, because, again, with a racist place like Connecticut, where do you have black people? Maybe a few left in Stanford, maybe a few left after Norwalk was gentrified. The remaining black population out of the many multinational immigrants here in Bridgeport, New Haven, Hartford. So you have way more people in the other towns, the people who redline, the people who don't want multifamily houses in their communities. That's where I would start my conversation. Those people need to change.
And how do you want them to change? Give me an example.
I mean, I'm not saying that it's going to happen even if a politician did it, because there's privilege. Like, at that point, you have to start talking to people about giving up their privileges, and people don't want to do that. You can't go to the people on the very bottom and say, oh, you're not getting together enough, you're not pulling your resources together enough. That's not what I would do. I don't see that as being effective at all, especially when people are struggling to survive. Again, like I said, if you're talking specifically about the native black community, there have been a lot of people who've been pushed out, and a lot of people who've tried to save any chances they had, and they've moved out. So I just personally wouldn't. I don't think I would start with the black community.
We have a group of clergy from the three big cities you've just mentioned, New Haven, Hartford, and Bridgeport. And they, as a group, have told Lamont that unless he does something to rectify the way the money is sent for educational purposes in low income areas, that they would not support him in the next election. Do you think that is a good strategy?
I mean, it definitely shows some kind of standard. I don't know. I'm a little conflicted because I definitely understand why public education is so important and why the churches are so involved with that. Um, I don't really know the answer. Unfortunately, I don't know enough about Governor Lamont and being here kind of stuck in whatever goes on in Fairfield County and particularly here in Bridgeport. It seems like there's almost no deal that can be made with someone like the governor to make things better, especially starting with the public schools. I'm not sure. I think it's a good ask, but I would also be very interested to know what like the impact of what those pastors are doing in their own community. Again, especially here in Bridgeport, especially on the east side in the east end where there's like all the businesses have been shut down and it's so deprived. It's like, how do you then just decide to start with public schools? You know what I'm saying? Like, I think it has to be a bigger overall ask for the city and for the community. I mean, to be honest with you, at this point, I feel like with the way things are going, again, I don't have any confidence that they'll change. So at this point, I feel like the state needs to pay the rest of us to relocate out of the state. I really do because they don't care. Like,
No, I have to tell you, Shariah, I agree with you 100%. They don't care. That's the bottom line. You can, they talk about black crime and putting in programs and to to help with community prevention and community violence. But I'm always struck by the fact that they sent 50 million to Newtown for Sandy Hook, but they can't even fund Project Longevity, which is a proven program that deals with gang violence and crime. Somehow,
right,
that alone tells me that Connecticut is not concerned about its black citizens and the needs of the black community. So,
I
yeah,
agree.
I just find it right down to the men and women who are incarcerated for marijuana. Nothing
Right,
bugs me more than these men, and some of them who have died in prison from COVID-19 because they
right.
were selling marijuana. And it really just rankles me. It really does.
And I mean, I probably don't have to tell you. I mean, again, specifically thinking about here in Bridgeport, where we really haven't had businesses in probably like 50 years. There's no like real community centers for people, especially when you're talking about the youth. Like, we have the worst of the worst here in our city, whether you're talking about homeless shelters and food pantries and things like that. So, like, the state makes it clear that all they're willing to really, quote unquote, invest in is organizations, maybe like some Catholic churches or some food pantries, or nonprofit organizations that are willing to kind of hand something out when it comes to an actual investment. So maybe you don't have to worry about children choosing drugs or the streets or the gangs. The state clearly is not invested in that. I'm still scratching my head about the juvenile detention center downtown Bridgeport.
Yeah, I think everybody is still scratching their head about that. Joe Ganna made a lot of promises to blacks when he asked for their support. And I just don't get why blacks continue to vote for people who it is obvious have no interest in the black community other than getting their vote. And
Right, right. And the only thing that I can see is that there's desperation and then the promises that he in particular made to folks and the jobs that he gave to some folks. That's why they kind of rally around him. Other than that, I don't understand any
No,
of
I
it.
don't. And it's not just Joe Ganim; it's a continued thing. Blumenthal, Deloro, Murphy. We
Right,
just seem to be stuck with this same cast of characters who are not doing anything to help alleviate the conditions in black neighborhoods. And it really is a challenge, and we do have a challenge going forward. So I'm not sure where we're going, Shariah, but I do know that we have to change course. We just can't stay on this same course that is
right,
not doing anything to improve our lives, and more importantly, not improving the lives of the children who are coming into the world. They come into the
right,
world, and it seems that they're just beat back with everything. They grow up seeing their parents, beg for more education money, more opportunities, better housing. And after a while, that just continues to weigh on somebody as they grow up.
right.
Any last words here?
It's just there's a lot for people to learn and get into the numbers to find out what we're really dealing with. Because another thing that I believe goes with our identity is just knowing where we are as far as politics, on our local level, as well as, on a bigger level, on a national level. And I think people should just arm themselves with that type of information before moving forward, because you really want to be informed, before you just go out. You want to know what we're asking for, know what we really need, and think about the future, because like you said, you make a good point about people's children and your grandchildren. You're trying to think in the future about what some of these policies, what some of our actions or inactions are going to reflect on them.
I agree. And I think what else is important, that you look at the person who you're voting for. And if you're voting for
Right,
that person a second, third, or fourth time and nothing has changed, maybe you're voting in the wrong person. It's about
hmm,
more than shaking your hand, smiling in your face, and
right,
tisk-tisking over the problems in the black community. We really need people who are people of action, and people
right.
actually prepared to do. And some of this is hard, but they have to be able to
Yes.
make the hard decisions in order to move us forward, because if we don't, nothing's going to change. Nothing is going to change for us. We're still going to be mired in poverty. Our children are still going to be mired in bad education. We're still going to not have opportunities. We're still going to have lousy housing.
Right. And people have to fight. Like you said, it's hard. Even with, I talked to you a little bit about what I'm dealing with in places like the city of
Right.
Bridgeport don't have a fair rent commission. So then what do I do? Just get taken advantage of by the property managements out here that are going to do whatever they feel they want to do. So, we need allies too. I know I personally am trying to keep and hold someone responsible, whether I just go to, in this case, the city code of housing, or if I have to try and go to someone at the state. But unfortunately, with the way things are set up in this country and in this state, they like to try and keep Black people at the bottom. They want to keep us as the hole in the donut. They want to keep us as the places with the violence and the alcohol and the lack of education so that they can thrive. We need allies that are willing to give up their privileges, that are willing to help speak up for us and demand those changes as well, or it's only going to get worse. So I totally agree with you, but unfortunately, we're not just certain parts of what's going to help us progress. We're going to need, that allyship as well.
You've been listening to Real Talk, Real People. If you would like to be on the show, have a comment about the show, or perhaps you have an idea that the show should explore, give us a call at 203 605 1859, or email us at realtalkrealpeoplect@gmail.com. And remember, start your Sundays with my column in Hearst, Connecticut newspapers statewide, and start your Mondays right here at Real Talk, Real People. Have a good week, folks. We'll talk again next week.